welcome to The World Today. I'm Amarachi Bani.
And I'm Millicent Walker. First, the headlines. Ukraine authorities say Russian forces attacking Ukrainian positions along the entire 480-kilometer front line in the eastern Donbass region.
At least 6 dead as multiple explosions hit Kabul schools today.
Plus, MPs get vote on investigating whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament over breaching COVID laws.
Thanks for staying with us. A look at what's been happening in Ukraine over the last couple of hours. Russian forces are attacking positions along the entire 300-mile and 480-kilometer front line in the eastern Donbass region. It comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that a long-awaited Russian offensive in the east has begun. Meanwhile, the Luhansk regional administrator, Serhiy Hadai, has urged locals to evacuate immediately from the region as Russian forces continue their assault. Earlier, he said 50 people had been evacuated from the eastern cities of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk and taken to safety.
Indeed posted today that everyone will be taken out. Ukrainian troops have left the city of Kreminna in eastern Ukraine and taken up new positions, and also it's a race against time to get supplies to Donbass. Despite the focus on the eastern offensive, Russian forces also struck several cities across the country in recent days, including Lviv in the west. Russian-backed fighters are also reportedly trying to storm an industrial complex in Mariupol, where Ukrainian troops and civilians are said to be holed up. Meanwhile, south of Kharkiv, Ukrainian forces are making some successful counterattacks, and this is coming from military analysts.
Here's more on the situation on the ground.
Is now initiating a new phase of what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine. Russia Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today said it's another stage of the operation in eastern Ukraine. Echoing comments from the Ukrainian president and senior officials on Monday that Russian forces launched a new offensive push along most of Ukraine's eastern flank and that the Battle of Donbass has now begun. In President Zelensky's video address, the Russian forces have started the Battle of the Donbass, for which they have long prepared. Meanwhile, overnight, Russian missiles and artillery forces struck 1,260 targets in Ukraine. Russian Defense Ministry also said Russian anti-aircraft forces downed the Ukrainian MiG-29 jets in the Donetsk region. The Ukrainian military side, through its spokesman, said that the Ukrainian army has repelled 7 attacks by Russian army in Donetsk and Luhansk region as Moscow launched an anticipated offensive in eastern Ukraine. A military spokesman for General Staff of the Armed Forces said Russian forces had dispatched further weapons and military equipment to Ukraine. The Ukrainian officials have described Russian forces in their offensive in eastern Ukraine as attempting to push through defenses along almost the entire front line Tuesday. Elsewhere, drone footage released has showed a large plume of smoke rising from the Azovstal steel plant, the main remaining Ukrainian stronghold in Mariupol. The footage, published by Mariupol City Council, showed large-scale destruction in the plant, which contains mirrored buildings, blast furnaces, and rail tracks. Been trying to take full control of the southeastern port city of Mariupol, which has been besieged for weeks, and which would be a huge strategic prize, linking territory held by pro-Russian separatists in the east with the Crimea region that Moscow annexed in 2014.
Joining us now is lawyer and counterterrorism expert John Essing. He joins us now from London. John, thank you for joining us on the program.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Russian forces have launched a new offensive push along most of Ukraine's eastern flank. They started that yesterday, and the Battle of Donbass has begun. How heated do you think this could get?
This is what Putin had been planning for. all through the COVID period. When the COVID-19 hit, he isolated himself. He's been planning for this. He planned initially to surprise Ukraine and take the whole of Ukraine within a couple of days, and to essentially surprise the West, so he can present it to the West as a fait accompli, if you will, that there was no point defending Ukraine, but he failed. Now he wants to try and take the Donbass region so he can save face, so at least he can have something to show to his constituents back home, because he's been lying to them a lot. And Ukraine, on its part, knows that it has to do everything possible to defend Donbass, because if they take the Donbass, then it is essentially cuts Ukraine economically of the rest of the world, because that's Mariupol is actually linked to Donbass to the south, to the Crimea. Sorry, the Crimea Peninsula to the south, and to Donetsk and Luhansk to the east. So what he wants to do is actually cut a straight line through Mariupol, so that so that Luhansk and Donetsk in the east can have a straight line, a supply line all the way through to the Crimea Peninsula and then to the Black Sea. So if he's allowed to do that, then it essentially cuts Ukraine off any supplies of its goods, because a third of the landmass, fertile land in all of Europe, 1/3 of it, approximately 30%, is in Ukraine, which explains why Ukraine is arguably the largest producer of corn, of barley, and of wheat. So if, for instance, if the price of bread in Nigeria has risen, it's as a result of a lack of sufficient supply. That's how important Mariupol is. So, and I know that the Ukrainians are going to do everything to defend it. And even the what's going on in Mariupol at the moment is, even though they know they might eventually lose Mariupol, but it's symbolic for everyone else, every other soldier in the east, to just take some moral boost from that and defend the Donbass as much as they can.
Well, speaking of Mariupol, some of the Russian-backed rebel forces in that region claim that they have taken, the last stronghold in Mariupol, which is there's a small industrial hub over there that they claim that they have taken over. But let's look at another issue now, which is, there's been a report about Ukrainian forces attacking the small town near the border, on the Russian side, near the border with Ukraine. If that is proven to be true, and I know Ukraine is denying this, but if that's proven to be true, how could that change the dynamics of this war?
If that happens, then it'll be the only real success for Russia since this war began, because even the Mariupol we are talking about, as at today, it's still not been taken. They gave them, the Russians gave the military 2 hours to vacate sometime this afternoon, but they're still holding on. And because there are lots of tunnels under the steel mill, and they've been there for about 8 years, so they know the terrain inside out. Russia is going to find it very difficult to dislodge them. So, but if what you're saying is true, then it wouldn't be much of a loss to Ukraine, because that when Putin set out and launched his initial attack, that wasn't one of his main considerations. He still hasn't been able to succeed.
Yeah, but we're also talking about, sorry to cut in here, but we're also talking about, the report about, that small town near the Russia-Ukraine border that has been hit. Ukraine denies attacking the town, but Russian forces are blaming Ukraine, for that attack. Now, if it is true that, Ukrainian forces did hit the town, how could that change, this war?
To begin with, if Ukrainian forces hit the town, I don't see why they're denying, because that's supposed to encourage them anyway. Russia has probably done that to put Ukraine in a bad light and to gain favor from its constituents back home. So it can give it an excuse, maybe to launch, and this is something I hadn't considered until now, maybe to possibly launch a tactical nuclear attack, or maybe even a chemical attack. If that is the case, then I think the West should be very wary. I think it should maybe try and restore deterrence and prevent Russia from planning what I think is either a tactical nuclear attack or a chemical attack. Because that may well be Russia doing that. This man does not care whether it's his people who fall victim to this, or or the Ukrainians. He's been wasting Russian lives as much as he's been the Ukrainians. So I suspect that this is a false flag and is going to act on it because it's getting desperate. So what the West has to do is ensure that he knows that if under any circumstances he uses either a nuclear weapon, either a tactical nuclear weapon or a chemical weapon, that the response does not have to be measured and it does not have to be proportionate. If he thinks he's using a tactical weapon because he thinks the response will be proportionate, will be measured, or will be retaliatory, he has already built in that calculus into his response, so he's ready for that. So he must understand that it does not need to be, the levels do not need to be the same. The West does not have to respond the way he has advocated the initial attack. He needs to know that, because there has to be, this is an opportunity to restore deterrence if that has happened. Because if no one says anything, or if anyone looks at it on face value, then he's going to go ahead and do it. And for a long time, the West has been, thinking of this war as if it's some optional intervention, because taking the countries individually, they can't see it really impact their national security interests.
Let me jump in here.
This is the time.
Let me jump in here. I just wanted to jump in. You're talking about how heated things could really get, especially with the concentration in the East. But if we have, Ukraine saying, this is the battle for Donbass, and then we have Russia saying they're bulking up forces in the East and they're getting ready to go. Based on what either sides, based on what they have, what they've prepared for this war and to take Donbass, who do you think will win? If Russia wins, do you think this would end the war, the invasion in Ukraine?
That's a good question. To begin with, I don't think Russia will win this. Now, it's easy to assume on the face of it that Russia may, because they have overwhelming superior conventional capabilities. They probably have a numerical advantage with regards to the military. But the basic fundamental essence of winning a war is the will to fight. If you do not have the will to fight, it doesn't matter what else you have. That can gain you sporadic wins of battles, but winning a war takes the will to fight, and it doesn't have that. Besides, we have seen that this Ukrainian forces have been able to demonstrate over the last 8 weeks that it has tactical resilience, it has operational flexibility. That theater is its own terrain. It understands it properly. Russia is just visiting there, and its morale has been hit hard, especially with it not losing its flagship a few days ago. And the weapons that are being supplied to Ukraine at the moment, if they've made their way to the east, that's something else I'm concerned about. If they've made their way to the east, then where they are actually needed, because they come to Lviv in the west, which is about 40 miles from the border to Poland, and then they come in from Poland, and then from Lviv they are taken to the east. And since Lviv has been bombed a few times in the last couple of days, I'm hoping that some of those weapons have not been damaged to the degree that they're useless. But if those weapons that they need are in the east, Russia will have a hard time penetrating them, much less, being able to win this. So you asked me for my opinion. I don't think that Russia has what it takes to win the war on Donbass.
That's the first time I think I've heard that. An analyst saying Russia does not have what it takes to win the war in Ukraine. John Essing, thank you so much for speaking with us. Appreciate your thoughts and your analysis.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Well, residents of Sloviansk have voiced their faith in the Ukrainian army today as Russian soldiers advance towards their own town. Russia launched its long-awaited all-out assault on East Ukraine, unleashing thousands of troops in what Ukraine has described as the Battle of the Donbass, a campaign to seize 2 provinces and salvage a battlefield victory. Ukrainian officials insist their troops would withstand the new assault, which they say began overnight with massive Russian artillery and rocket barrage and attempts to advance across almost the entire stretch of the Eastern Front. Well, in the eastern town of Sloviansk, 2 residents said they would not leave their homes as air raid sirens echoed in the streets. Well, they said, compared to other cities, it still stood good there. A lot of people have moved out. The city's empty. You can see it yourself. Sirens are on all the time. You can hear some explosions, but the town is intact, they say. Another resident also says he still has faith in the Ukrainian army.
Well, almost 5 million Ukrainians have fled the war since Russia's invasion. The United Nations says in the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Women and children make up around 90% of those who have fled. Men aged 18 to 60 are eligible for military call-up and are unable to leave the country. Almost 2/3 of all Ukrainian children have been forced from their homes, including those still inside the country. This is from the United Nations. More than 2.8 million Ukrainian refugees are now in Poland. The UN Refugee Agency figures shows nearly 645,000 Ukrainians fled in February, with nearly 3.4 million doing so in March and 945,000 leaving so far this month, April. UN spokeswoman told reporters in Geneva that the key is that the borders remain open, people can access safety, and when they get to neighboring countries, they have access to assistance. Other countries which have accepted Ukrainian refugees are Romania, the Russian Federation, Hungary, the Republic of Moldova, Slovakia, and Belarus.
Well, car maker Stellantis, which produced and sold the Peugeot, Citroën, Opel, Jeep and Fiat brands in Russia, has announced it is suspending production as its Russian plant due to logistical difficulties and sanctions imposed on Moscow hit. Stellantis is the world's 4th largest automaker with just 1% of the car market in Russia. Well, it ran a plant in Kaluga, some 125 miles off Moscow, with Japanese car maker Mitsubishi. That was before it halted production there in April. A statement from Stellantis said, given the rapid daily increase in cross-sanctions and logistical difficulties, Stellantis has suspended its manufacturing operations in Kaluga to ensure full compliance with all sanctions, all cross-sanctions, and to protect its employees. Scores of foreign companies have announced temporary shutdowns of stores and factories in Russia. Or they say that they're leaving the country for good since Russia began what it calls a special military operation in Ukraine. And that began on February 24. Stay with us. Coming up after the break. Well, still looking ahead to the second round of polls in France on Sunday. President Macron cast himself as a last defense against far right as the vote nears. Welcome back. And tough day it's been for the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He's back in Parliament today. Not for Prime Minister's questions, but to apologise. But before that, the Prime Minister met with his Kurdish counterpart, Masroor Barzani, at number 10 Downing Street today. That meeting came hours before Mr Johnson's first appearance in the House of Commons since being fined over Downing Street parties with police who found that he violated pandemic lockdown restrictions.
Prime Minister Barzani, who heads the government of the northern Iraqi region of Kurdistan in March, said that his region has the capacity to make up for at least some of the energy shortfall in Europe as Western countries move away from Russian-supplied fuels.
Well, also in Parliament today was the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. She's been telling MPs people should be granted asylum in the UK based on need, not on the ability to pay people smugglers. She says the government has done, in her words, more than any other recent history to support those fleeing persecution, conflict or instability.
She also added that the government cannot focus support on those who need help without tackling illegal migration. She says her proposal will deter illegal and dangerous routes of entry to the UK, make it easier to remove those with no right to be in the UK, and provide a common sense approach to controlling immigration, both legal and illegal.
Our correspondent, Juliana Laika, has been monitoring the situation on the ground, although from home now. Jules, thanks for joining us on the programme. And I know the Prime Minister has apologised again and again for attending those parties. Does he still need to do so in Parliament?
Good afternoon, Amarachi. Well, absolutely he does. In fact, you're right. Just moments ago, he delivered his second official apology on the record in a pretty jam-packed chamber. As to be expected, the Commons wasn't sitting for 2 weeks because of the Easter recess. And then all of a sudden, we found out last week that the Prime Minister, alongside his wife, Carrie Simon, the Chancellor, received this fixed penalty notice, otherwise known as a fine, from the Metropolitan Police for breaking COVID laws. Now, in a world that has Boris Johnson, that apology would be enough, but clearly it's not. It's a very, very serious offence. So the name-calling that's been read out in Parliament as we speak is, a serial offender, criminal Prime Minister. And sadly for him, all of these things seem to be true. I think it's pretty clear that the Prime Minister has lost the trust of the British public. Yes, he is popular. Yes, people like him. But I think it's really important, and it's clear from being on the ground, people were seriously affected by COVID-19. Those lockdowns, not just the hundreds of thousands of people died, but the mental health and well-being of individuals, the closure of schools and what that's done to children's education, particularly those from low-income families, is something that people can't get back. And it is a very, very serious. And I don't think this time round an apology for the Prime Minister is going to be enough.
Well, but we can see the pictures, from Parliament earlier today, really jam-packed, as you said. But, MPs are also planning to investigate him, right? And the Met Police already conducted its own investigations. They've handed him, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, as well as 50 other people fines for breaching COVID restrictions. So how will their investigation differ from that of the police?
Yes, well, you're absolutely right that there is likely to be a probe. Sir Lindsay Hoyle, just before the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, gave her statement on the Rwanda scheme, did accept a motion that was put forward by Sir Keir Starmer, the opposition Labour Party leader, to conduct a vote in the Commons on Thursday, which will ask MPs to discuss whether or not the Prime Minister's actions should be put to the Standards Committee, where they will look into whether or not he did mislead Parliament. And unfortunately for the Prime Minister, there is so much recorded evidence of him speaking at the dispatch box. Many of those statements were played on the World Today, Amarachi, where he said there were no parties, he didn't attend any, everything was conducted in the proper manner. And now all of a sudden he has a fine. Did he mislead Parliament? There's lots of, some people are calling them nodding dogs, MPs going around defending him, saying that he didn't knowingly did that. But that is something that's going to be up for debate. So that's going to be taking place on Thursday. Fortunately or unfortunately, the Prime Minister won't be in attendance because he has a planned trip to India, which I believe he will be leaving for tomorrow. So he won't be around for it. And of course, it's really important, crucial to note that the Prime Minister has a 75 working majority. Now, the question is, and this is what Sir Keir Starmer was just saying moments ago to MPs, is are they going to back the Prime Minister blindly? There are local elections taking place next month. Lots of people are fearful about losing their seats. Do you stay with the Prime Minister as a Conservative backbencher and, kind of disobey your constituents, or do you stand up to him, vote against your government, and then this matter will be taken further? So at the moment, Amarachi, it's all in the hands of MPs, but some of the statements that are being made in Parliament today are pretty shocking, really. A criminal-breaking, law-breaking Prime Minister, a serial offender. This could be the end, but never say never when it comes to the PM.
Let's go back memory lane a little bit. December the 1st, 2021, when he was asked if there was a party in Downing Street, Johnson said all guidance was followed completely in number 10. December 8th, after the leak of the video showing number 10 staff joking about the December 18 event, he said had been repeatedly assured that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken. Later that day, he told Commons he was sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed, the rules were followed at all times. In January 12, we saw him apologising, attending a Downing Street garden party on May 20th, 2020. But he said he had believed implicitly it was a work event. Quite damning, Juliana, like you had earlier mentioned. But do you think that this next investigation, they're probably headed towards impeaching him in any way?
Oh, goodness, if only we had the impeachment law here. I think the Prime Minister could have been out months ago, Millicent. But, what you've just, read out is a litany of pretty poor statements. And I think, if we look at the snap poll that was done by YouGov last week, it showed that 75% of the British public just don't believe him, and they do believe that he did mislead Parliament. Unfortunately for the Prime Minister, there are still more investigations from the Metropolitan Police. Those close to Downing Street and Whitehall believe that the Prime Minister will actually receive another fixed penalty notice. Of the 12 parties that the Met are investigating, we believe that the Prime Minister could have been at least 6 of those parties. And at the moment, he's only received a fixed penalty notice for 1. Also, as well, Sue Gray, remember that name? Last year, she was one of the most famous women in Britain. When we received a copy of her investigation, it was highly redacted. And that was because she didn't want to jeopardise, well, she couldn't legally jeopardise the Metropolitan Police case. So now that the investigation is winding up, I think this probe, which if it does get the vote on Thursday, will certainly be bringing more of those allegations to light. Some people have said that if it does come to light, it's going to be very uncomfortable reading for the Prime Minister. Lots of people also talking, Millicent, about ethics and standards and morality in number 10. There were cases of wine being brought into number 10 Downing Street every single night. There was a party, a wild party, just the night before the Duke of Edinburgh was buried. it's pretty embarrassing and pretty shambolic. And yes, the Prime Minister is a populist leader who has done absolutely incredibly well in kind of leading this international coalition against Vladimir Putin. But that's completely different. People are not willing to put the two together, as the Conservative Party would like. I think the British public are able to separate the two. Yes, you've been great when it comes to rolling out the vaccination. Yes, you've been wonderful in being a close ally to Volodymyr Zelensky, but you were absolutely terrible at sticking to your own laws when some people could not even say goodbye, not just to their elderly fathers and mothers. There were children that died. Parents were not able to say goodbye to them in the hospital. There were people that had funerals where they were only able to invite one or two people. It just doesn't compare. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens on Thursday. But I don't think this is just going to be a slap wrist for the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Juliana Olenka, our London correspondent, joining us there.
Explosions have been heard outside a boys' school in the Afghan capital, Kabul, killing at least 6 people and wounding 11 others.
The blast happened at the Abdul Rahim Shahid High School in the Shia-dominated west of the city. The number of dead and wounded isn't quite clear. A nearby tuition centre was also targeted in a grenade attack.
There have been no immediate claims of responsibility, but the Islamic State militants have attacked the area before.
3 explosions rocked a high school in western Kabul today, killing at least 6 people and injuring children, according to Afghan security and health officials. Residents were seen washing down dried blood stains and clearing shattered glass debris afterwards. Many residents in the neighborhood belong to the Shia Hazara community, an ethnic and religious minority frequently targeted by Sunni militant groups, including Islamic State.
I was at work. My family called me. They were crying and told me that a bomb blast happened next to our house. I left my job and came home in a hurry and saw the crowd near my house. People were carrying the victims and other injured people.
There was no immediate claim of responsibility for the attack. The Taliban said they have secured the country since taking power in August, but international officials and analysts say that the risk of resurgence in militancy remains, and the Islamic State militant group has claimed several major attacks. Meanwhile, food prices have soared in Afghanistan since the U.S. withdrawal. According to the United Nations World Food Programme, since June, the price of wheat flour has jumped 53%, cooking oil 39% and sugar 36%. Other kinds of food such as dairy products, meat, vegetables and fruits are in serious shortage. Recently, the Chinese government delivered an aid in the form of rice for 3,000 needy and displaced Afghan people in Kabul. Although people were grateful for the assistance, some said the aid was not sufficient amid the ongoing crisis the country is facing.
Today, 3,000 families will be assisted, and the Islamic Emirate is struggling to transparently distribute all this assistance to needy people in Kabul and other provinces.
The U.S. war in Afghanistan, which ended after a hasty pullout in late August 2021, lasted nearly 20 years.
The VOA's Ayaz Gal is in Islamabad, from where he's monitoring the situation in Kabul. Ayaz, thanks for joining us. There are different accounts that we're hearing about these the blasts today. Some accounts say there were 2 twin blasts, and others says 3. Could you clear that up for us?
Well, we know by this moment that, yes, there were 3 blasts. One happened inside this boys' school, and the second one happened in a nearby tuition center or training center for school boys, after the school timings. They go there for extra studies. So there were 3 planted devices, 2 in the school exploded and 1 exploded in the training center.
Interesting. And what about the casualties, Ayaz? Have they risen now? Because, there was a possibility of there being more casualties or fatalities from these blasts.
Well, what we know from the official Taliban account, and that was like 7-8 hours ago, that at least 6 people were killed in these blasts and more than a dozen were wounded. But eyewitnesses that we have spoken to and even local media have given a much higher death toll, and that is like at least 26 people were killed. Now, because Taliban quickly cordoned off the area and stopped media from going close to these, the site of the blast, it has not been able, journalists have not been able to really confirm exactly how many bodies were taken away by relatives, because this is the routine in Afghanistan, and particularly in this Hazara community area, the minority Shiite community, that whenever these attacks happen, quickly remove their bodies and take them away for burial.
Ayaz, help us understand why this attack has happened at the boys' school and that particular location.
Well, because this western part of Kabul is dominated by minority Shiite Hazara community, and that area has witnessed over the past several years repeated attacks carried out by Islamic State militants operating in Afghanistan. So again, once again, the prime suspect is the Afghan affiliate of the Islamic State, which is known as Islamic State Khorasan province. But so far, we have no claims of responsibility. But ISKP it seems to be the prime suspect.
And Ayaz, concerning the security situation in Afghanistan, which is something, everybody is worried about, tell us a bit more as to what security agencies, authorities are really doing to curtail some of these attacks.
Well, one thing is very much clear that since the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban in August, we have seen stability in Afghanistan because there have been no war-related casualties as the war has ended after 20 years. But now we are seeing in recent weeks that these kind of attacks by Islamic State and other militant groups are picking up, and which is definitely a cause of concern for the Taliban because they have been assuring neighboring countries and the world at large that they are capable of controlling terrorist groups operating from the country and threatening neighboring countries and beyond. So these attacks just now fuel those concerns that whether Taliban will be able to live up to their pledges that they will be effectively countering terrorism in Afghanistan.
Ayaz, I know that, Pakistan and Afghanistan do share a border. I know that, after the U.S. pulled out, the U.S. and other Western countries pulled out of Afghanistan, there were concerns about, how the Taliban's presence in Afghanistan could also impact on Pakistan. It's been months now since that happened. What is security like, and what's Pakistan's relations with Afghanistan like today?
Well, that's a good question because Pakistan apparently has been suffering the most ever since the Taliban have taken over the control of Afghanistan because in the last 4 months, more than 100 Pakistani soldiers and officers of the military have been killed in attacks by the fighters of the Pakistani Taliban, which is designated by the United States as an international terrorist group. And that's the group, the TTP as they call it, which has fought together with the Taliban, Afghan Taliban, against the international forces for years. And now it seems that they are taking advantage of the Taliban route in Afghanistan and strengthening their ranks. And that is why Pakistan, especially security forces in border areas of Pakistan, have come under repeated attacks. Even they were attacked this morning. And almost daily attacks are taking place by the TTP. That's why we had over the week reports of airstrikes being conducted allegedly by Pakistan against some of these hideouts of the Pakistani Taliban on the Afghan side of the border, although Pakistani officials have not taken responsibility for those strikes. But because of those strikes, tensions have really now increased between the Taliban ruled Afghanistan and the Pakistani government here.
Ayaz, thanks again for speaking with us and bringing us up to date on this story, and do stay safe.
Thank you.
Still ahead on the program. Paragliders return to Ghana's skies for Easter Festival. Please stay with us.
Welcome back. And things are heating up for the elections, the second round of polls in France. And one analyst has warned that Macron's opponent, his rival in the election, Marine Le Pen's victory at the election would put the EU in an existential crisis, as the far-right candidate and outgoing French President Emmanuel Macron will compete in the runoff on Sunday. Well, she recalls that the EU, the pro-European Macron victory over extremely nationalistic Le Pen will be welcomed by EU officials who already have to deal with a number of crises. This policy analyst, Sophie Ponschleigel, recalled that Le Pen has a long history of pushing an anti-European agenda, adding that her victory would put on hold further EU integration.
So in the second round of the French presidential election, you have Emmanuel Macron, which is the incumbent president, that has positioned himself as neither left or right, but is rather on the center-right. And you have Marine Le Pen from the Rassemblement National, which is a far-right candidate with an extremely nationalistic agenda. Macron is extremely pro-European. Currently, France has the council presidency, and you can see that he wants Europe to become more sovereign, whereas Marine Le Pen is on the likes of the PiS government in Poland or Orban in Hungary. She says that Europe should be a Europe of nation-states, and she's against more European integration. Well, I think from a Brussels perspective, most people hope that Macron will win simply because he is much more pro-European as Marine Le Pen, and also because the EU is currently having a lot on its agenda when it comes to the Ukraine war, when it comes to rule of law crisis, when it comes to climate agenda. And we have European elections coming up in 2024, so there are 2 more years really to move forward. And I think with Marine Le Pen in the Élysée Palace, this might be much more difficult than with Macron.
Well, incumbent French President Emmanuel Macron has been attempting to present himself as the only alternative to stop the far right as he faces Marine Le Pen for the second round of the presidential election. Macron became France's youngest leader since Napoleon 5 years ago, pitching himself as a political outsider who would break the old left-right dichotomy, make France more investor-friendly and make the European Union stronger. He seemed destined for a steady climb up the ranks of the French establishment when he decided to play his skills as a deal-making investment banker to the world of politics. But since striking out on his own in August 2016, after only 2 years as a minister, he has tapped into widespread disenchantment to broadcast a strong anti-establishment message. He cut taxes for big business and wealthy, loosened labor laws, marketed France Incorporated as a startup nation, but anti-government yellow vest protests and then the COVID-19 pandemic forced him to slow reform plans. The French leader plans to double down on supply-side reforms he has implemented during his first mandate, with the main plank of his manifesto being an increase in the minimum pension age to 65 from 62. Prior to the first round of the election, far-right Le Pen successfully tapped into anger over the cost of living and a perception that Macron is disconnected from everyday hardships, and that saw her finish with 23.1% of votes compared to 27.85% for Macron. Well, the vote next Sunday is a repeat of the 2017 match-up in the second round. Then Macron, a pro-European Union centrist, easily beat Le Pen when voters rallied behind him to keep her party out of power.
All over the mandate of Emmanuel Macron disillusioned and disappointed a lot the center-left, but in compensation, he managed to get the center-right. The old people, the pensioners, the old conservative people, part of them have joined Emmanuel Macron because actually they are seeing he's doing the job. He has a good profile to be the French executive, and also on major issues for the center-right, economy, he's doing it, security, security and immigration. He's quite tough, actually, on that. So if there is no more crisis, what is Macronism exactly? What Macron is going to do if he is not managing crisis, is going to make the reforms. And the reforms do not please all the voters, particularly extending the pension age at the age of 65, particularly reforming the welfare state also. And Emmanuel Macron has very, very significant project in that. So winning the election may be more easier for Emmanuel Macron than managing France in a second mandate.
Staying with the French elections, he might be president, but that's no guarantee he will win the election on Sunday. So says his Prime Minister, Jean Castex, who says people should not think Emmanuel Macron is guaranteed to win the April 24 runoff. According to him, to abstain puts Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen on the same level, but there are key differences. The Prime Minister says Le Pen victory would be dramatic for the country. Director of Ipsos polling firm Bryce Tenturia stressed that a Le Pen victory cannot be excluded, but that the most likely scenario is a Macron win with around 54% of votes. Let's remember, Le Pen is challenging an incumbent centrist Macron in the elections. Opinion polls already show Macron is edging ahead of the poll on Sunday. Both will be seeking to attract voters who back far-left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon after he came third in the first round on April 10, with 22% of the votes, just 1% less than Marine Le Pen.
We head to Ghana now, where once a year thousands of people from around the world flock to north of the capital, Accra. They come for a paragliding festival and carnival that residents hope may establish the West African nation as a hub for extreme sports. Let's take a look.
This year marks Ghana's paragliding festival's return to its annual schedule after the COVID-19 pandemic forced organizers to postpone the last 2 years. Around 400 people registered for tandem flights with professional pilots in the towns of Kwahu and Alibi. Dozens brought their own equipment to fly solo. 34-year-old Jonathan Quay first flew in 2006, the festival's second year, as the passenger of an American paraglider. He's been paragliding ever since. Having acquired his tandem certification during the COVID-19 pandemic, he is now the only Ghanaian at the festival certified to carry others into the clouds.
Most people think it's not a safe sport, and people have like a mentality of like, oh no, this is only for white people, that kind of thing. And all those people who say that, they've never been here, so they always discourage their friends, don't do it. But when their friends come and they do it, and like, but it's that easy like that, so why haven't I been doing like that? Then we ask them questions, where can I learn? How do I go about it? Then I also start giving them information.
But the scene is growing, with more Ghanaians taking part.
Jonathan is based here, and I think Kenichi is also based in Ghana. The other two of us, we are outside, like Switzerland and myself in the US. So, sometimes representation is good. When you see people that look like you doing what you're doing, they're like, oh, I could also get into it. See what I'm saying? So I feel it's going to really motivate a lot of people, like, oh, if Stephen can do it, maybe Francis can do it. And people are open to the idea that, oh, they could actually put their mind to something and get it done.
Quay says paragliding has taught him lessons that have reshaped his professional life in ways he never thought possible. By helping others to fly, he hopes to pass on the principles like patience, tranquility, and risk assessment.
I used to be like quick-tempered. If I drive on the street and you just cross me, I'll just give it to you. But now I look at certain things and I'm like, no, it's not necessary. Let's just let it go. So it has made me a calm person. I look at things like before I make a decision, I have to think and rethink and like just go. Because any decision that I make will affect whatever I do. And it's the same thing in this sport. Conditions are not right, so you just chill, wait. If it's good for you, you can go. So those skill sets that I'm learning has changed my perspective about life, like in a lot of things.
The Ghanaian Paragliding Festival is an annual event held during Easter. Like any other year, the Paragliding Festival, which has become a key highlight of the Easter Festival, attracted a number of patrons from different countries. The 4-day event, which started on Friday, April 15th, came to a climax on Monday, April 18th.
That looks fun and scary at the same time.
Did you hear him? He said it has made him calm. Aren't there other things that make people calm?
Okay. When you're 30 feet above the ground, you better be calm. You better be calm or else you'll crash. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
I'm Millicent Walker. Have a good evening.